The air was thick with the hum of machinery, a sterile monotony broken only by the occasional flicker of failing lights. The world outside the observation window was an endless expanse of dark matter, littered with dying stars. The station, a crumbling relic of humanity's past empire, hung in orbit above a forgotten planet, slowly succumbing to the weight of time and neglect. The remnants of humanity, scattered across 100 dead colonies, had forgotten what hope tasted like. But here, in this forsaken corner of the galaxy, one man still fought against the tide. Lucas Orkheim had once been someone, a decorated soldier, a man of purpose, but that was before the rift, before the powers that be had decided he was expendable. Now he floated in the dark, his only companion the bitter silence of space and the hum of the failing machinery around him. Lucas leaned against the cold steel of the observation deck, eyes fixed on the endless void. The Hell Rift, it was out there, a tear in the fabric of space-time, an anomaly so vast and incomprehensible that it had terrified the brightest minds of the universe. They'd called it the Hell Rift for good reason. Every ship that had entered, it was lost, never to be heard from again. Theories had swirled for decades. Was it a black hole, a gateway to another dimension, or something far worse, a living thing that devoured everything in its path? Lucas had been called to the Hell Rift for a mission once, a mission to explore, to understand the unexplainable. He had seen the others die, one by one, victims of the Rift's horrors, but Lucas had survived. And for that, the higher-ups had labeled him expendable. As the last of his kind, the government saw no need for a soldier like him when the galaxy was too busy unraveling itself. They'd set him adrift in this forgotten station, away from the important work, away from the action. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated Lucas Orkheim. His hand grazed the control panel, a relic from a time before. The old technology hummed in response, ready to do what it had been designed to do. He had never intended to be a hero. He had been a soldier, trained to fight, to survive. But survival had its price. It wasn't just about staying alive. It was about what you did to others to stay alive. And Lucas had done things that haunted him, things he couldn't undo. The station's lights flickered once more, the buzzing echoing in his ears. He ran a hand through his hair and gritted his teeth. The decision had been made. He couldn't stay here any longer. The Hell Rift called to him, more than a rift in space. It was the only thing that made sense, a final challenge, an answer to the questions that gnawed at his soul. With grim determination, Lucas set the course. He wasn't just going into the Hell Rift. He was going to make it answer. The ship hummed to life beneath him as he felt the familiar thrum of the engines. The darkness of the station was behind him now, and the vastness of space lay ahead. But there was something different about this mission. Something about the rift felt personal. His fingers danced across the worn-out control panel, and the ship surged forward, hurtling toward the event horizon of the Hell Rift itself. The Hell Rift, a place where the universe bent and broke, a place where laws didn't apply. And now, Lucas Orkheim was going to cross that line. He would make it listen. Tension. Development. Lucas sat at the helm, his eyes fixed on the ever-approaching anomaly. The instruments flickered, throwing bursts of light into the dim cockpit. His heart raced, and yet there was an unsettling calm about him. He had lived through the horrors of war, the endless nights of terror on distant worlds. The Hell Rift was just another threat, another enemy to face down. But the closer he got, the more his certainty wavered. The rift wasn't like anything he had faced before. It wasn't an enemy with a face, a planet with an army. It wasn't something that could be fought. It was something that existed on a level he couldn't even begin to understand. It was the unknown, And that was what made it terrifying. As he drew closer, the ship began to shake violently, the walls groaning under the strain. The Hellrift's pull was undeniable now. The instruments malfunctioned completely, and the ship seemed to lose all sense of direction. A sickening feeling of vertigo washed over him. Was this how every other explorer had felt before disappearing forever? The rift loomed ahead, a swirling mass of darkness that devoured all light. There was no sound, no explosion, just the suffocating silence of space. Lucas gritted his teeth, pushing the ship forward, his mind focused solely on one thought. I will not die here. The ship's systems began to break down, unable to withstand the rift's immense gravitational pull. Lucas had no choice but to disengage the autopilot and take manual control, his hands trembling as he fought to stabilize the craft. Sweat trickled down his brow. The rift began to pull at him, threatening to tear him apart. But just before the ship could be consumed, something strange happened. A ripple, no, a pulse, traveled through the rift. The ship jolted, and Lucas's breath caught in his throat. As the whole universe seemed to stretch and contract around him, the dark matter that made up the rift's core seemed to take shape, swirling in intricate patterns, almost as if it were alive. Then an image flashed in his mind, a vision of something, a city, not human, not even from this galaxy. The sight was so vivid, so real, it almost felt as though he had crossed into another plane of existence. But what caught his attention was not the city, but the voice. It whispered, "You are here, finally." Turning point. Lucas froze, his hand still gripping the controls. The voice was in his head, deep and resonant, like something ancient and eternal. It felt wrong, like an intrusion into his very thoughts. He tried to shake it off, but it only grew louder, more insistent. You seek to challenge the rift, to bend it to your will. But you are not the first. A wave of nausea washed over him as the voice reverberated through his skull. His mind raced with questions, with disbelief. What is this thing? What do you want from me? The voice responded as if it had read his thoughts. I am not your enemy. I am the gatekeeper, the one who has seen all that you cannot. All that humanity has not understood. Lucas's heart pounded as the weight of its words sank in. This wasn't just a force. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. This was something far beyond human comprehension. And yet, there was something familiar about it. Something that tugged at the edge of his memories. He felt the ship's systems finally stabilize, a strange calmness enveloping him as the rift's pulse settled into a steady rhythm. It was like the entity, whatever it was, had accepted him. But for what? What did it want? And why had it brought him here? The pulse grew stronger. Then suddenly a flash of light erupted from the rift, and the ship was jerked forward faster than any human ship had ever traveled. Time twisted around Lucas like a spiral, reality warping and contorting. He was no longer in control, closure or transition. As Lucas's ship careened into the heart of the Hell Rift, he braced himself for the inevitable. But what lay ahead was far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. This was no ordinary journey. This was the beginning of something far greater, something that would challenge not just him, but all of humanity. And it was only just beginning. The ship lurched as it passed through the rift's threshold, and for a moment Lucas felt his body stretch, twist, and contort like a piece of elastic being pulled in every direction. The walls of the ship buckled around him, groaning under the strain. The instruments went haywire, flickering and sparking in a chaotic dance. He tried to focus on the console, to regain control, but everything seemed to slip through his fingers, like sand through a sieve. Then the shaking stopped. Dead silence. For the first time since entering the rift, Lucas felt weightless, completely disconnected from everything. He floated in a vast nothingness, his breathing shallow and rapid, as if his lungs were fighting the absence of air. It was then that the voice returned. "You have arrived." Lucas shuddered, his fingers gripping the seat beneath him. It wasn't just the voice in his head. This was something else, something far more powerful. He could feel its presence, an ancient intelligence, older than anything he had ever encountered. The voice was not a whisper anymore, but a reverberation that seemed to echo in his very bones. His heart raced, pumping adrenaline through his veins as fear set in. This wasn't just an alien life form or some cosmic entity. This was something that existed beyond comprehension, something that could reach into his mind and pull at the fabric of his thoughts. He had thought he was brave, that nothing could touch him, but now, in the face of this incomprehensible force, he felt small. "I am the rift," the voice continued, its tone echoing across his mind like a thunderclap. "I am the beginning and the end. You have crossed into my domain. Few have dared and none have survived." The ship, once a reliable machine, seemed nothing more than a fragile shell in this strange new dimension. The laws of physics no longer applied. Lucas could feel the pull of something intangible but very real. It was as if reality itself was bending, warping, distorting. "I'm not here to die," Lucas muttered, his voice cracking, as he fought to steady his breathing. He tried to ignore the overwhelming sense of helplessness, pushing his will against the gravity of despair that threatened to crush him. "I'm here to understand, to make you understand." The rift's pulse thrummed louder, as if it was mocking him. Then something changed. The ship seemed to stabilize, the violent tremors ceasing, and the instruments on the console flickered back to life. Slowly, hesitantly, a strange, eerie calm fell over the cockpit. But it wasn't the calm of safety. No, this was the calm before the storm. "You seek knowledge," the voice said, and Lucas could almost feel the amusement in its words. "You humans, always seeking, always probing, you do not know what you ask for." Lucas felt the hairs on his neck stand up. "What are you?" "I am the first, the one who watches, the one who knows." The voice paused, a deep, ponderous silence filling the space. Then it continued. "You call me the Hell Rift. You seek to understand my power, but you do not know what you face." Lucas's mind raced. This wasn't just some random cosmic entity. It was something with a purpose, something with an agenda. He had walked into this mess willingly, but now he wasn't so sure. Was he ready for this? Did he have the strength to face whatever was on the other side? And what did it mean for humanity to face something so ancient, so powerful? The ship jolted again, but this time it wasn't the turbulence of space. It was as if the rift itself had reached out and touched the ship, pulling it forward, drawing it deeper into its realm. Lucas could only watch as the stars outside the window twisted and bent, as though the very fabric of reality was being unraveled. There was no going back. He slammed his hand on the controls, trying to pull the ship away, but it was useless. The rift wasn't just a force of nature, it was alive, and it was pulling him deeper. Suddenly, the ship lurched forward, the display flashing an alert. Unknown object approaching. A massive structure emerged from the swirling darkness of the rift. It was enormous, so vast that it made the ship seem like an insect in comparison. It looked like a city, but not like any city Lucas had ever seen. Towering spires reached into the sky, their surfaces shimmering with strange energy. The architecture was alien, built of materials that defied explanation, organic, yet mechanical, as though the city itself had grown from the fabric of the rift. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. He had seen alien structures before, but nothing like this. The sheer scale of it was enough to make him feel insignificant. He couldn't fathom how something like this could exist. And yet here it was, floating in the vastness of the Hell Rift. as though it had always been there waiting, and then, from deep within the city, a voice boomed. "You come seeking answers." Lucas's blood ran cold. This wasn't the rift speaking anymore. This was something else. A presence, more tangible now, like a shadow of a memory that stretched across time. "You think you can challenge the rift. You think you can understand it, but you are nothing more than a spark in the darkness." Lucas's eyes narrowed as he stood up, his hands gripping the sides of his seat. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when he was this close. "You're wrong," he whispered, a fierce resolve building in his chest. "I'm not here to challenge you. I'm here to change things, to show humanity that we're not just insects in the void. We are something more." The voice laughed, a cold, echoing sound that made Lucas's skin crawl. "You may think that, but the rift is beyond your understanding, and you will learn that there are consequences for your defiance." Lucas felt the weight of those words, but they only made him more determined. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for humanity, for all the worlds that had given up, for all the people who had lost their hope, and the rift would learn that humanity was far from weak. Lucas sat in silence, his pulse still pounding in his ears as he stared out at the dark, shimmering city that floated like a spectre in the heart of the rift. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to escape while he still had the chance. But there was no escape. He knew that now. The rift had made it clear that retreat was impossible. The voice, a being of incomprehensible power, had already begun to weave its influence into his thoughts, feeding on his doubts and fears, sowing seeds of uncertainty deep in his mind. It wasn't just a physical force, it was a mental one, shifting, his perceptions clouding his judgment. Lucas could feel it like a weight pressing on his chest, but there was still a flicker of defiance left inside him, stubborn and unwilling to die. As the ship drifted closer to the alien city, its immense scale made Lucas feel even more insignificant. The towering spires of the city stretched far beyond what his senses could measure. They pulsed with an otherworldly energy, lighting up in flashes of sickly green and violet that cast strange, ethereal shadows across the ship's hull. It was like something out of a nightmare, something too alien to understand, too vast to conquer. Lucas's thoughts were interrupted by the low hum of the ship's communication systems. It wasn't a normal signal. It was more like a ripple in the air, like the very fabric of reality was bending to allow the transmission to reach him. Then came the voice again, calm and foreboding, though this time there was a subtle shift in its tone. "I have shown you the city. I have shown you my domain. Do you still believe you can challenge me?" The question lingered, heavy in the air, as if daring him to answer. Lucas's chest tightened, the weight of the rift's presence pressing down on him from all sides. He knew what it wanted: fear, doubt, surrender, but he wasn't about to give it the satisfaction. "No," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I'm not here to challenge you. I'm here to learn, and I'm not leaving until I have an answer." And some rift seemed to respond with a ripple, a wave of energy that coursed through the ship's hull, shaking it momentarily. Lucas braced himself, but the ship held firm. "You are foolish," the voice said, its tone growing colder. "But I will give you the opportunity to prove your worth. If you truly seek answers, you will face the trials of the rift. Only then will you understand what lies beyond. Only then will you grasp the power that waits for you." Lucas felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with fear and anticipation. The rift was offering him something, some kind of test. He didn't know what it would entail, but there was no turning back now. He had come this far, and there was too much at stake. He gripped the ship's controls tightly, his knuckles white, and made a decision. "I accept," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Tell me what I have to do. The response was instant. "Enter the heart of the city," the voice commanded. "Find the core. There, you will face what lies hidden. There, you will discover the truth about the rift and the power that awaits you." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts. He took a deep breath and turned the ship towards the looming gates of the alien city. As he approached, the air around the ship seemed to thrum with energy, and the gates themselves began to open, revealing an impossibly vast interior. It was a place of dark beauty, towering structures that seemed to breathe, pulsing with an eerie, rhythmic light. Lucas hesitated for only a moment before he steered the ship into the gates. Inside, the city was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and vast, open spaces that defied logic. There were no clear roads, no markings or signs, just endless shifting architecture that seemed to change with every step. The walls seemed to hum with an ancient energy, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. As Lucas maneuvered deeper into the heart of the city, a feeling of unease settled in. The air grew thicker, heavier with each passing moment, and as he ventured further, he realized something. The city wasn't just a physical space, it was alive. Every surface, every structure seemed to pulse with intelligence, as though the very architecture itself was aware of his presence, watching. The ship's systems began to flicker again, and for a brief moment, Lucas thought he had lost all control. The instruments spun wildly, flashing warnings of incoming interference. But before he could react, the ship's AI voice spoke, its voice cold and mechanical. "Warning, unknown entity detected." Lucas's blood ran cold. He slammed his hand on the control panel, trying to regain some semblance of control, but the ship wouldn't respond. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. The ship lurched as a powerful force gripped it, pulling it towards a massive structure in the distance, a tower of shifting shadows and glowing energy. Lucas's heart hammered in his chest as he struggled to steer the ship, but it was futile. The rift had other plans. The doors of the massive tower began to open slowly, revealing a dark, foreboding interior. Lucas had no choice now. He was being pulled in, deeper into the unknown, and whatever awaited him inside, he had to face it. Lucas's heart raced as his ship was dragged deeper into the heart of the rift's towering structure. The massive tower loomed ahead, its dark silhouette against the pulsing energy of the alien city. Every instinct told him to turn back, to abandon this madness, but he couldn't. He was already too far in. The ship shuddered violently as it passed through the colossal entrance, a whirl of energy engulfing it, rendering the view outside into a blur of impossible colors and abstract forms. Lucas gripped the controls tightly, trying to steady his, shaking hands. But it was no use. The rift had already taken over. There was no going back. The ship plummeted toward the ground, spiraling through a cascade of glowing light, as if being consumed by the very fabric of space itself. In a flash, the world outside went dark. The familiar hum of the ship's engines died, leaving only a thick, suffocating silence in its wake. He was still alive. But for how long? The ship's emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow. Across the interior, the air smelled stale, metal and ozone mixing with something darker, more alien. The ship had landed, or had it been dragged? Lucas wasn't sure anymore. He stepped out into the cold, harsh atmosphere of the alien chamber. The walls around him seemed to shift and pulse, as if alive. The ground beneath his boots cracked and groaned, as though it were reacting to his presence. His breath caught in his throat as he glanced up at the vast, cavernous expanse overhead. The ceiling seemed to stretch into infinity, filled with shimmering, incomprehensible patterns that spun and twisted like galaxies being born and dying in an endless cycle. It was beautiful and terrifying. "You have come far, human," the voice echoed through the chamber, its tone thick with an emotion Lucas couldn't quite place. Mockery, Pity? Something more ancient? Something he couldn't begin to understand? But the trials are only just beginning. Do you truly believe you are ready to face what lies within? Lucas's blood ran cold. He could feel the weight of those words settle deep into his chest, a pressure that made him feel small, insignificant, yet still defiance surged within him. He had come this far, and he would not bow to whatever this thing wanted him to be. "Ready," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at the edges of his mind. "I came here for answers, and I won't leave until I get them." There was a long silence before the rift spoke again. This time its voice was almost a whisper, carrying an undertone of something ancient. Very well. In the blink of an eye, the chamber around him transformed. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, revealing a massive gaping chasm that stretched far beyond what his eyes could see. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if the very air was alive, the energy in the room swelling. In intensity, the rift was testing him, but what would it test him with? Lucas was snapped from his thoughts by a sudden flash of light, too bright to look at directly. He threw his arm up to shield his eyes, but the light wasn't blinding. It was alive, pulsating. It pulsed in his chest like a heartbeat. The light grew, and with it, a low, guttural rumble vibrated through the ground. The walls around him collapsed into an abyss of swirling darkness. From that darkness, something emerged, a form, its shape incomprehensible, made up of swirling shadows and broken fragments of light. It was like nothing Lucas had ever seen, a mass of pure energy and twisted form. Yet within the chaos, he saw eyes. 2 eyes. No, gaze was more accurate. The eyes locked onto him with an intensity so potent, so suffocating, that Lucas could hardly breathe. It was as if the very presence of this entity was weighing down on him, forcing him to confront every hidden fear and every doubt he'd ever buried deep inside. "You dare to challenge me, human?" The voice rumbled from the depths of the creature's form. It was not just a voice. It was the very embodiment of space, of time itself. Every word twisted and bent the air around them, vibrating with an energy so potent it made Lucas's knees buckle. Lucas took a deep breath. Pushing the fear down, he forced himself to stand tall. There was no other choice. He had come too far to falter now. "I'm not challenging you," Lucas said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'm trying to understand, to survive. What do you want from me?" The creature's gaze intensified, and for a long moment the room was still, the world holding its breath. Then it spoke. "You are nothing but a speck in a vast, uncaring universe," it said, its voice now laced with cold finality. "But there is potential in you. Potential to understand, to become. The question is, what will you do with that power?" Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to make sense of the creature's words. There was a part of him that wanted to run, to escape this madness, but another part, the part that had carried him this far, demanded answers. He had to know what this entity was, what the rift truly wanted. Before he could respond, the ground beneath him trembled. Once again, the darkness from which the creature had emerged seemed to collapse in on itself, pulling the walls of the chamber into the abyss. The entity was shifting, its form dissolving and reforming with terrifying speed. Its eyes locked onto Lucas again, and in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just about power. It was about survival. His survival. "The truth lies within," the creature intoned, "but are you willing to face it, to become more than just a human?" The world around Lucas shuddered, and then everything went black. Lucas woke to silence. There was no crash of thunder, no distant rumble, just a quiet, endless void. He opened his eyes, and for a moment he thought he was still lost in the heart of the rift. The surroundings were dark, the air thick with an oppressive weight, and the eerie stillness of the world made him feel suspended between reality and something else. He blinked several times, his mind struggling to grasp what had happened. Where was the entity? Where was the abyss? Had it all been a hallucination, or worse, a test? His pulse raced in the cold emptiness, but then, slowly, something shifted. A glimmer of light appeared before him, small at first, then swelling, taking shape. He stepped toward it instinctively, his legs weak but determined. The rift had released him. Or had it? Lucas found himself standing once more on the ground, though the world around him was still a twisted alien version of the one he had once known. He looked up, scanning the sky, or what passed for a sky, where the constellations shifted with unnatural fluidity. Stars spun in patterns that defied all sense of order. He felt small, insignificant beneath them. And yet, in that smallness, there was something strangely humbling, something freeing. The alien city around him stretched beyond the horizon, a maze of structures made of materials he couldn't name. Towers of twisting energy, bridges that pulsed with iridescent colors, and walls that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the very air. He turned, eyes scanning the barren landscape, but something caught his attention. A figure. The same energy form he had seen before, but now it was different. It was no longer a monstrous thing, but a being standing before him, in the same swirling mass of light and shadow, but now it radiated an undeniable presence, something no longer threatening, but understanding. Lucas took a step forward, hesitant but driven by an unknown force. He could sense the transformation in the air. The rift wasn't just a test of power, it was a trial of the soul. And it had not been his survival that mattered most. It had been his willingness to accept the unknown, to face the things he didn't understand, and still choose to move forward. "You survived," the being said, its voice softer than before, the edges of its words carrying a tone of something like reverence. "Survived," Lucas repeated, his throat tight. His chest felt heavy with something beyond exhaustion. It felt like the weight of the entire universe pressing down on him. "Is that all? Did I survive or did I fail?" The entity's form shifted, the energy swirling around it like a vortex of stars. "You did not fail. You adapted." It sounded almost curious, as if surprised by his response. Lucas's eyes narrowed. "Adapted? What does that even mean?" The entity tilted its form as though considering his question. "You reached into the heart of the unknown," it explained, each word carrying more weight than the last. "You faced something you could not control, did not understand, and yet you chose not to run. You chose to become instead. That is the essence of life, of all things that exist in the universe. It is what makes you more than just human. It makes you something else." Lucas swallowed. The enormity of what was being, said sinking in. Was that what this place had wanted from him? To test his capacity to face the unknown with nothing more than will. Was this some kind of cosmic awakening? He looked at the glowing being and asked the question that had gnawed at him ever since his arrival. "What do you want from me?" "What happens now?" The entity's gaze, if you could call it that, met his with an intensity so strong it sent a chill down his spine. "We want nothing, Lucas of Earth. But you now stand at the threshold of everything. You will decide. What happens next? You have already crossed the line between your world and ours. Whether or not you return, the path has been set in motion. The future you will shape is yours to claim. But it will not be easy, and you will not be the same." Lucas hesitated. The enormity of the entity's words settled in his chest. He had crossed a line, whether he wanted to or not, and there was no going back. "But I'm just one person," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "How can I shape a future? I'm nothing, just a human." The entity's form flickered, and Lucas felt the full weight of its ancient presence. "You are not nothing. You are the spark of everything that follows." The words echoed in Lucas's mind. He had come here seeking answers, and now, he realized, the only answers were within himself. The rift hadn't just been about confronting cosmic entities or alien landscapes. It had been about confronting his own limitations, his own understanding of what it meant to be human. Sharp pain throbbed in his head as the light around him began to grow more intense. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. When he opened them again, the rift was gone. The alien city, the towering sky, the swirling galaxies, they were all gone. Lucas stood once more on the rocky surface of the familiar landscape he had known before the rift. The ship he had once thought lost was there, intact and waiting. And yet everything was different. The world was the same, but he was not. He knew that the universe had opened itself to him in ways he could not fully understand. There were new choices ahead of him, new possibilities, and in his mind he heard the voice of the entity one last time. "Your path has only just begun, Lucas. You will walk it as you choose. But remember this, you are never truly alone. Not now, not ever." He took a deep breath, the air around him heavy with the possibilities of what came next. Whatever the future held, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready. Lucas sat in the cockpit of the ship, staring out at the stars as they whizzed past. The universe was vast, immeasurably vast, and yet now it felt more familiar. It wasn't the same as before. His mind, once limited by the confines of human understanding, had expanded beyond the borders of Earth and the cosmos itself. He had returned to his ship, the battered Solace, but it no longer felt like a prison of isolation. It had become a vessel of infinite possibilities. The rift had taken everything from him, the certainty of his world, the comfort of the known, and had left him with a raw, almost painful awareness of his place in the universe. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a hero. He was simply a person who had walked into the unknown, who had chosen not to retreat when faced with something bigger, darker, and far older than himself. The stars outside blinked like distant eyes, and for the first time Lucas felt he was being watched, not with malice, but with curiosity, as though the universe was waiting to see what he would do next. His hands hovered over the control panel, but he didn't immediately reach for it. There was no need. The ship would take him wherever he wanted to go, wherever he chose to go. But the question lingered in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. What was his purpose now? The rift had left a mark on him, something more than just the physical scars of its abyss. He had witnessed the raw, untamed forces that powered the universe, the alien intelligences that shaped life itself. He had walked alongside beings whose understanding of existence was far beyond human comprehension, and yet they had been moved by him, by his willingness to face the unknown without fear, by his ability to change, and now he knew, deep within him, that the answers were not outside in the vastness of space, but inside. He would never truly understand everything. There would always be questions. But those questions were no longer things to be feared. They were tools to be used, questions to be asked, and the unknown was no longer an obstacle. It was a doorway. He reached forward, tapping the comms console. "This is Captain Lucas Serrano of the Solace," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "To anyone listening out there, whether you are human, alien, or something else entirely, there is a new road ahead of us, and we're going to walk it together." His words seemed to vanish into the stars, swallowed by the endless void. But something changed in the stillness of the ship. a feeling that could not be put into words. The universe had heard him. There were no immediate responses, but the silence didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like a promise that whatever lay ahead, it wouldn't be faced alone. Not again. And then the familiar hum of the ship's engines filled the cockpit, a comforting, grounding presence that told him he was no longer drifting in the dark. He was moving forward, toward something new. The stars outside grew brighter, more vivid, as though reacting to his newfound clarity. They beckoned him. A new path had opened, and it led toward uncharted territory. Not just in space, but in understanding of who he was and what humanity could become. The ship shifted into motion, its engines powering up with a smooth, satisfying hum. Lucas didn't know where it would take him. He didn't know who or what he might encounter next. But one thing was certain. The universe had expanded, not in size, but in the possibilities it offered. As the ship hurtled through the stars, Lucas allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The unknown was terrifying, yes, but it was also beautiful, and it was human to seek it, to embrace it, and for the first time, Lucas felt he wasn't just a survivor. He was part of something, much, much larger than himself. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready.